This video is going to be about Jill Stein's historic recount efforts in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. So Jill Stein, she doesn't raise any money, as the Green Party candidate. She barely raised less than $1 million in 2012, and then she raised, I don't know, a couple million in 2016. But she actually raised $7 million, over $7 million for her recount. So if you combined all the money she raised in 2016 and 2012, that doesn't compare to the money she had raised for the recount efforts. That just shows me how hungry the American people are for some election integrity. Let's just recount the thing and just see if, our elections are good or if they're not. Seems like it should be a periodic thing anyways. We should be auditing our elections anyways, which is what Pennsylvania is going to, decide now. Ralph Nader, because he ran in 2000, there's a Green Party in Delaware and Maryland today. So to think that these people, by being part of the election process, they are part of the national narrative. They're part of the national discussion. And so Ralph Nader and Jill Stein have had concrete victories. Okay, so the Pennsylvania settlement, just real quick, I guess, for Jill Stein in Pennsylvania, they got a settlement that said that they're going to replace their current system with paper ballots by 2020. And then by 2022, Pennsylvania is going to enact automatic audits after every election to ensure the accuracy of the vote counts before the results are certified. So they're going to have automatic audits. They're going to get paper ballots. So because of Jill Stein, Pennsylvania is changing their election system. Their entire election system is going to get changed. They're going to have paper ballots, so now you actually have something to recount. There were just a bunch of machines, just a bunch of electronic machines in 2000, and so now you actually have something to recount with the paper ballots. There's actually a paper trail, so you push, I went to Kentucky. Kentucky has got die-bold machines, and you punch in, your vote, and you're like, well, did it go anywhere? I don't know. And then I try to take a picture of it, and they try to, confront me about it. What other way do I have evidence that, my vote actually mattered? If that precinct had 0 votes for Bernie Sanders, then I would know for sure. But, fucking Letcher County, what can you do, right? So, the Pennsylvania settlement, because of Jill Stein, that's an actual concrete victory. So some people, Tom Hartman said she's not even going to be on the ballot in a third of the states. Well, that should alarm you too. Maybe she could have done that. There was 3 states where she wasn't on the ballot. Jill Stein, if you were in South Dakota, Nevada, or Oklahoma, you couldn't vote for Jill Stein because Oklahoma, Nevada, and South Dakota doesn't believe in democracy, and they fucked Jill Stein over. And so what the third parties have to do in America is they spend 50% of their budgets just getting on the goddamn ballot. Meanwhile, the Democrats just had to sign the name, and they're right there. So that's another thing when it comes to access to the ballot. So that's another reason for independents to run. So let's see here. Jill Stein sued the Wisconsin Elections Commission. They didn't want to count the ballots by hand. Eventually, the whole thing, you're not going to find out much. It didn't overturn the elections. Wisconsin, we found out Donald Trump actually won Wisconsin by a greater margin. We found 131 more votes. That was in Donald's favor. But when it comes to Michigan, there was actually more votes found for Hillary, but it was only about 100-something votes too. So what does that mean? That means we had good elections. We had, strong election integrity, and we wouldn't have known that if Jill Stein wouldn't have pushed for the recount. Well, we had an election, lost, just who gives a shit, just, go home. But they're going to push the Russia hacking narrative for quite some time, right? So if there's a Russian hackers, and then Donald Trump himself says there's, millions of illegal voters. So if there's millions of illegal voters and for the Republicans and Russian hackers for the Democrats, why would you be opposed to a recount? Who the fuck would be opposed to a recount? And she was able to raise the money to do it. Wisconsin, she thought it was only going to take $1 million, but then the bill goes up to $3.5 million. So these lawyers, they get the biggest chunk of all the $7.5 million that she had raised, but it was segregated, so specifically that money could only go for that purpose. A lot of people want to say, where is that money coming from? $7 million. You're curious about $7 million. Meanwhile, we spend $700 billion. $700 fucking billion. So you're going to be concerned about this little $7 million that Jill Stein was able to raise. Meanwhile, $7 billion fucking dollars, 700. So that's, you know, not just 100 times Jill Stein, that's 100,000 times Jill Stein. So the military budget is 100,000 times what, you know, Jill Stein was able to raise. But people are going to question where's her money go, but they don't say shit about the $700 billion. AOC, she had mentioned something about all that, you know, money. What happened to the trillions? We don't know. It just disappeared. Ajamu Baraka, this fucking piece of shit. I cannot, you know, he was okay, you know, he's all about racism and imperialism, and, you know, his rhetoric is pretty decent, but he was the vice president, the running mate of Jill Stein, not Chris Hedges, not Ajamu Baraka. They couldn't stand with Jill Stein. There was actually a Green Party person that was circulating a petition trying to stop this, you know, saying that Jill Stein was just unilaterally making this decision. It's only Jill Stein's decision. She's a candidate, so only she could have called for the recount. She went forward because, you know, you have to, and they're going to criticize her, you know, with the whole lawsuits, thinking that, well, what if she loses, then that's just going to lose it for everybody. No, if anything, she's opened up the floodgates for always recounting every election, and that only gives you greater certainty of, you know, do you believe in our election system? If you think our election has integrity, then the recount shouldn't be shit. The recount should just say, yep, there you go, and that is what the recount had shown. So that was, you know, Ajamu Baraka's. There are several other things that they were worried about. So she was worried about the undervotes. There was blank ballots, so she was worried about the blank ballots and some other things. But there was like 100,000 or 100 million people who didn't vote. So what do we do with that? How come they're disenfranchised? There's some people who were just shooed away, but if there were people that actually filled out a provisional ballot, that, you know, something could be done there. There was also interstate cross-check. So what the Republicans always talk about, and I don't know why the Democrats are actually so against it, but getting a voter ID and then having voter security, so kicking voter, you know, dead people off the voter scrolls. So you got millions of dead people that still registered to vote. So just clean up the voter scrolls every 10 years. That seems okay to me. And then, you know, what's wrong with having a voter ID? Right now you could go with a credit card and just say, hey, my name's on this credit card that I found in the garbage, so let me vote. I don't think, you know, people aren't really that driven to, you know, get into some election voter fraud for whatever reason, so it's not a huge issue at all. So it does, essentially, it's used to keep less people from going to go vote. And so that's, you know, why the Republicans are for it. But it's security and it's, you know, voter ID. Like, these are okay things. So there's an interstate check system. And so that's another thing that Ajamu Baraka, I'm just guessing, what other fucking things could they have asked Jill Stein's lawsuit to pinpoint that could have actually had some traction? So this interstate cross-check, which essentially is just if you're registered in one state, you can't be registered in another state, and they'll send a letter, and then they'll send another letter, and if you don't respond, then you get kicked off of both of them. So the interstate cross-check, they're saying, had purged a bunch of voters, so how come they didn't go after the interstate cross-check? Well, you know, there's actually a rationale behind what they're doing. They could try that. They could have gone that direction, but that's, you know, just as flimsy as the 75,000 blank ballots, too. The whole hacking thing, you know, were they using infrared? Did they get into the websites? Could they get into the machine? Diebold actually, you know, they were nervous. Jill Stein wanted to get the code from the Diebold just to see if it had been tampered with. And so if you have the original code, then you could compare it to the code that's currently in it, and then you would know if it's been hacked. The fact that these Diebold machines are computers, people know how to hack into computers, and so they're not actual full-blown computers. So I've seen videos and I've read where people have broke into these Diebold machines within a minute or 10 or 12 or so, but basically you can crack a Diebold machine because you can crack a computer. And that's all the Diebold machine is, just a computer for voting. So to think that hacking could... Anyways, so Ajamu Baraka has a very flimsy excuse. He didn't have the courage to support Jill Stein when she became politically relevant. I mean, that's essentially, people can't support you because they're afraid of what you might become. And so she became politically relevant, and then she saw all of her allies drop her. All right, Chris Hedges dropped her. Ajamu Baraka dropped her. You know who defended Jill Stein? Tucker fucking Carlson. Tucker says it's for election integrity. I don't think anything is going to come out of it. They're going to count it up. It's going to go back to Donald, and then he'll have even that greater of a victory than what he had before. He won the actual original vote. He won the recount, so he's, even more of the president than what he was before. So having election integrity, that was a concern of Donald. He said if he didn't win, he would have filed lawsuits. If he didn't win, he thought that the election system was rigged. So therefore, he wouldn't concede the day after the election, because why would you concede the day after? So Ajamu Baraka, just like Donald Trump, they're both shitting on Jill Stein, and they're essentially questioning her motives, saying that she picked the 3 states that she picked, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, because that was 3 states that Donald had won in that could have been flipped, and then it could have gone to Hillary. So they're saying that she was doing the dirty work of the Democratic Party. The Democrats didn't want nothing to do with it. When she started it, they weren't anywhere around. They did, offer some tepid passive support, but they never actively actually pushed for it. So this is Jill Stein all the way. It's not Barack. It's not Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. It's Jill Stein and the Green Party. Ajamu Baraka, he's a shitty, running mate, very, very shitty running mate. He said that it's not her motivations that were being questioned. He supports her motives, and he believes that she's got the purest of intentions, but not really. So he talks shit against Jill Stein, just like Donald Trump was doing, saying that they're doing the dirty work of the Democrats, or that it's the Democratic Party just trying to invalidate it. They're coming after me, guys. That's what Donald Trump is saying. And so, that's what Ajamu Baraka is saying. Well, yeah, you're helping the Democrats. Donald Trump said you're helping the Democrats. Well, if the elections in the U.S. had a bunch of irregularities and it was overturned, that could have helped Hillary, right? He says, I'm not in favor of the recount. Ajamu Baraka says that because it's potentially dangerous and it could be mischaracterized by the broader political community. So Ajamu Baraka had some fucking piece of shit get his ear and then turn him against Jill Stein when she's politically relevant, when she actually matters. The recount effort has resulted in serious questions regarding the motivations of the recount that threatens to damage the standing and reputation of the Green Party, its supporters, and activists. Shut the fuck up, Ajamu Baraka, you piece of shit. This is historic. This is one of the greatest things Jill Stein did. She was politically relevant. They ignored her most of the time. And this is smart, good politics, because it's good policy. Good policy is good politics. So Jill Stein's recount efforts were people-powered. 110,000 people donated an average of $45. So $45 donations, 100,000 people gave it to her. It's people-powered. That's how she was able to get the $7 million. So Jill Stein is just wonderful for many reasons. Her policies, she says, if we're not an empire, then what is? What is an empire? If 900 military bases, 100 islands, 100 colonies, or 1,000 colonies, if we're not an empire, then what the hell is an empire? So, she's real smart and intelligent. Bernie Sanders had said that a recount had happened in his mayor's race. It just happens. Recounts happen in elections, right? He says the reason why it's touching a nerve is because people want to, be able to trust in their institutions. Canada does their elections with paper ballots. It takes a little longer, but it works. That's Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders took Jill Stein's questions and Jill Stein's recount, and he says, yes, we could have paper ballots. That would make it better. That would make it better. So recounts happen all the time. I mean, the fact that it happens for smaller elections, but it never happened for a national election. Who gives a shit? What a small. So the whole argument, another thing, is that those 3 states, so Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, they're going to say that Jill Stein she gave the election to Donald Trump. That's a stupid argument. I never really decided who the lesser of the 2 evils were, but I would say I was leaning towards Donald. So if you forced me to choose between, shitty Donald or shitty Hillary, Donald would have been my vote, but instead I voted for Jill Stein. So to assume that Jill Stein voters would go straight to Hillary, I'm liberal, I'm progressive. So typically, yeah, you might think that Jill Stein voters would go to Hillary, but that's, not the case with me. So to assume that because Jill Stein was in the race, if she wasn't in the race, therefore her votes would have gone to Hillary, and then Hillary would have won. That's not a good, safe assumption. Now, there could be an argument, so, I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. Our election system doesn't allow, essentially, for independents to be able to become president, but because they can change the election, because they can take 1% of the electorate, and they can switch the election from one candidate to the next, That makes them relevant. That means they got their fingertips on the ledge. Now they can pull themselves up and maybe they can do something about it. So at the very least, third parties are relevant. Maybe they can win the presidency, maybe not. But they're relevant. They're relevant because if you're going to blame these candidates, then you better, confront this. And you're not going to confront it by being a dick. You confront it by having a progressive candidate that speaks to people's values. You confront it by, not being a piece of shit. Anyways, Michigan. Okay, so the numbers on Michigan, Donald Trump had 11,000 over Hillary in Michigan. And in Pennsylvania, he had 44,000 over Hillary. And in Wisconsin, he had 23,000 over Hillary. So several thousands, but it's within, just kind of a small margin of victory. Now, in Michigan, Jill Stein won 51,000 votes. And that's bigger than the margin of victory. Donald had 11,000 votes over Hillary. So therefore, if Jill Stein's votes were redistributed into Hillary's pocket, then Hillary would have won Michigan. And the same is true with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, Jill Stein got 31,000 votes. Donald beat Hillary by 23,000. Take Jill Stein votes, give them to Hillary. Now Hillary just won Wisconsin. Take, the exact same thing with Pennsylvania. She had 50,000 votes. Jill Stein had 50,000 votes in Pennsylvania. Donald had 44,000 over Hillary. And so that means take Jill Stein's votes, give it to Hillary. Now Hillary wins. So that's a good thing because that makes her politically relevant. That actually should be the main aim of a third party. The independent parties, yeah, you want to win the presidency, but the first thing you got to do is, essentially deprive one of the candidates of, their victory. Take their votes away from them. Because if they don't pay attention to you and if they don't speak about your issues, that's a good way to hard flank left. And that's exactly what the Democrats needed in, 2000 and all the way up to 2016. So the margin of victory is smaller than the total amount of votes that Jill Stein had got in those states. So just like Nader stole the election, yeah, no, not really, but in a way, yeah, okay, so Jill Stein stole the election from Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So you should have fucking paid attention to her media. You shadowed her, you called her an anti-vaxxer, you didn't really take her serious, you didn't ask her about her policies. She's a genius, she's very intelligent, but you didn't ask her those questions. And now all of a sudden, you're going to blame her for ruining this? So, she got 50,000. She got 1% of the vote. So she was able to get 50,000 votes, and that was, statistically significant, politically significant. And now all of a sudden she's to blame. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say she's irrelevant and she's stupid and who gives a shit about her, and then all of a sudden she's very relevant and, she's ruined it for Hillary because she's so smart and her political tactics are so, you can't have it both ways. You can't do it both ways. So, whereas, Jill Stein has a good rebuttal against that, she'll say that her votes aren't, the Democrats did not own the Green Party votes. And they didn't. They don't. If I didn't vote for Jill Stein, I would have voted for Donald Trump. So, therefore, to sit there and assume that all Jill Stein voters would have been Hillary Clinton voters, that's the problem right there. You're assuming something that's not true. So, I'm glad that she was politically relevant. I'm glad that, the margin of victory, she got more votes than the margin of victory with those states. And if that's the case, that she helped Donald win, well, he was the lesser of the two evils. He should have won anyways, right? If you're forcing me to make that choice. I voted for Jill Stein. I feel good about Jill Stein. I love Jill Stein. I believe in Jill Stein. I believe in Jill Stein till the day I die. Whereas if you're forcing people to vote, between the lesser of the two evils, what is that? I mean, that's not doing... What the fuck is that? You're making people vote for evil? I don't like voting for evil, so I rejected evil, and I voted for goodness. And, fuck the lesser of the two evils. Vote for goodness. Imagine if everybody voted for goodness. Jill Stein's a modern-day prophet. Jill Stein, Jesus Christ, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Nader, they don't have shit. Jesus Christ and Martin Luther King Jr. ain't shit compared to Jill Stein. Name one person that's more moral, more courageous, who stands up for progressive values, takes her licks, takes her criticisms in stride. Media reporters were fucking rude to her if they gave her a moment of attention. Who else could have gone through all that shit? And she's right about every goddamn fucking thing. So, people want to say, well, she was wrong about this, homeopathy. There's 73 pages of the Green Party platform. So for 72 pages and a half, she's 100% right. And then you said, hey, there's this one thing that you had an issue with. And homeopathy is just holistic medicine, which is, you know, natural and good. I want to talk about the successes of the individual states, or what happened with the individual states, with Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Another rebuttal for the people saying that they just picked those 3 states because it could have overturned in Hillary's favor is that she was going to audit the entire country. So once she had, you know, done this, and if there was, you know, if there was corruption, voter fraud, then she would carry on. She would continue on and audit all of America, especially, you know, Oklahoma, fucking Oklahoma and South Dakota, Nevada. So she was on the ballot in 45 states. And in 48 states, you could have voted for Jill. Georgia, North Carolina, and Indiana had write-in campaigns. So 48 states could have voted for Jill, but South Dakota, Nevada, Oklahoma, they could not. And so we could have audited South Dakota, Nevada, and Oklahoma. How come you're being shitty to, you know, the Green Party's been around, the Libertarian Party has been around for quite some time. Their barriers to entry, their threshold is fucking bullshit. So if you lived in South Dakota because your government is anti-democracy, Oklahoma, Nevada, Oklahoma fucked Nader over too. So South Dakota, Nevada, Oklahoma just keeps on periodically, just over and over again. They have, you know, a corrupt political system. That could have been audited. But to say that she wasn't on enough ballots, well, that's ridiculous. She was on plenty of ballots. And maybe I should just come back to it because I heard that beeping, so I'm not going to get through all of this. So I guess just a little bit of information. What am I going to title this? It's fucking shit. Michigan, right, I said, essentially Pennsylvania, they had a settlement, so she changed their entire election system, but she didn't overturn it. Wisconsin, we found out that Clinton had 131 votes that wasn't counted before, or Donald actually had more votes in Wisconsin, but he had less votes in Michigan. So Hillary had 102 more votes in Michigan. Donald had 131 more votes in Wisconsin. So that's interesting. What is up with those discrepancies, right? There's some margin of error. It's not statistically significant, but something's going on there. But, you know, ultimately, Donald Trump is going to bitch about it because he's afraid that he's going to lose the election. But all that the recount did was just show that the elections have integrity, and therefore Donald Trump won fair and square. So why would Donald Trump be opposed to, you know, winning fair and square? Why would he be opposed to having election integrity? Because he's a fucking salesman. He's a business salesman, just selling a fucking crap of goods, right? He's just a bullshitter. He's a bullshit artist selling you a crap of goods. He'll just tell you whatever you want to hear in order to get you to do what he wants you to do. So I'll come back and I'll talk more in detail about Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What happened? How, you know, what was the process? What did we win? What didn't we win? And yeah, quit fucking with Jill Stein, you pricks.